Hey everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be tackling a pretty big topic today. Religious liberty and politics. It can get kind of heavy, but we're going to make it fun, A&D interesting, don't worry. We've got some super cool sources lined up to help us out. First up, we're going to be checking out this book called Gospel Workers. It was written way back in 1915 by Ellen G. White. She's a super important figure in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Then we'll jump forward in time and look at an article. It's from the official Seventh-day Adventist website, and it's called The Adventist Church and Religious Liberty.
Yeah, it's amazing how these two sources, even though they were written over a century apart, they both have something to say about the things people are talking about today.
Totally. It's like they knew what challenges we'd be facing now. So what we're going to do in this deep dive is really try to understand how the Seventh-day Adventist Church sees this whole connection between faith and politics. And hey, even if you're not a Seventh-day Adventist yourself, there's still a lot here for everyone to think about, like how we live out what we believe, especially when the world around us doesn't always agree.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that really jumps out from that Gospel Workers book is this idea of standing up for what you believe, even if it means going against the flow. They make this really cool comparison between the disciples back in the Bible, in Acts 4.1 time, where they basically tell the authorities, look, we have to obey God, even if it means disobeying you guys. And this big historical event called the 1529 Diet of Spires.
Diet of Spires. Okay, I don't know why, but that makes me think of like a medieval diet plan or something.
Haha. Well, there were some heavy decisions going down for sure, but it wasn't about losing weight. This was a huge meeting where the Holy Roman Emperor, he basically issued this decree to try and stop religious freedom. Like, he wanted to squash the whole Protestant Reformation thing. So everyone who had embraced these new beliefs, they were under a ton of pressure to give in.
Okay, so the stakes were pretty high then. What about those German princes? Were they on board with the Reformation or what?
Oh yeah, they were like the leaders of it. And they did something really brave. They flat out rejected the emperor's decree. It was like they were saying, nope, when it comes to matters of faith and conscience. Just because the majority agrees on something, it doesn't mean it's right. We answer to a higher power.
Whoa, talk about a power move. They were really putting it all on the line to defy the emperor like that.
You got it. And this whole idea of answering to something bigger than yourself, even if it means standing alone, it's something that speaks to so many people. Even if you're not religious, makes you think about times in your own life when what you believed clashed with what everyone else expected of you.
Right. It's that struggle between fitting in and being true to yourself. Now let's talk about how Seventh-day Adventists see authority. It's an interesting take for sure.
Yeah, so the Gospel Workers book is pretty straight up about it. They say obeying human laws is important, but there's a catch.
Oh, I bet it's not about just blindly obeying everything. Right?
But you nailed it. They're basically saying you gotta obey human laws unless they go against what God's word says. It's like there's a hierarchy, divine law comes first.
So it's more about thinking things through, choosing your battles carefully, not just rebelling against every single rule you don't like.
Exactly. The whole point is to act and speak with wisdom, really thinking things through. It makes you wonder what happens when laws you really believe in get challenged or even overturned. How do you stay true to your values while still respecting authority? I mean, it's a dilemma we all face in one way or another.
It is. It's a real balancing act. Now there's something in Gospel Workers that might surprise some people. It's their take on political involvement. And I gotta say, I'm not sure everyone's gonna agree with this.
Yeah, it's definitely a bold statement they make. They're basically saying Christians should stay completely out of politics. No voting, no campaigning, no getting sucked into those heated political arguments that just take over everything.
Well, hold on a sec. At first glance, that seems kind of extreme. But maybe if we dig a little deeper, we can see where they're coming from.
Right. It's not about being apathetic or ignoring the problems of the world. The book really emphasizes the importance of unity, avoiding those arguments that can rip communities apart. Imagine if every church service turned into a political rally.
Yikes. That would definitely change the vibe. You go to church for spiritual guidance, not to hear someone's political opinions from the pulpit.
Yeah.
So they're saying the church should be like a sacred space, a refuge from all the political battles going on outside.
That's the idea, and it brings up a good question. Does this separation from politics even make sense in today's world? It's almost impossible to completely avoid political issues, especially with social media throwing different viewpoints at us all the time. Could this stance actually hurt some causes you care about?
It's a tough one for sure. Everything feels so political these days.
Oh.
So where do you draw the line? Oh, and speaking of drawing lines, Gospel Workers goes on to say that being separate doesn't mean being reclusive.
Oh, that's a key point. It's not about hiding away from the world or pretending the problems don't exist. It's more about letting your actions speak louder than words. Like, let your choices show what you believe.
Yeah, it's kind of like the example they give about temperance. Seventh-day Adventists are known for not drinking alcohol, but they see it as a personal choice, a way of living out their faith, not like a political campaign to force their views on others.
Exactly. It's about influencing people by how you live.
Makes you think about what values you live out every day. Maybe without even realizing it, you're influencing others. Even if you're not getting involved in politics, maybe that quiet, consistent way of living out your beliefs is actually more powerful.
Totally. It's a good reminder that our lives are always sending a message, whether we mean to or not. And in a world that's so often dominated by political battles, that's a pretty encouraging thought. Now, before we wrap up this first part, there's this interesting comparison Gospel Workers makes to Martin Luther. You know, the guy who basically kicked off the Reformation with his writings?
Right. His ideas spread like crazy, even without the internet or social media.
Exactly. And the point they're making is that we have even more ways to spread a message today than Luther did back then. Books, websites, podcasts like this one. It's amazing. But the key thing is it's not just about having the tools. It's about how much passion and dedication we put into using them. How committed are we to sharing what we believe and making a positive impact on the world?
Yeah, it's like you can have the fanciest megaphone in the world, but if you're not speaking from the heart, if you don't really believe in what you're saying, it's just noise.
Yeah.
So in this first part, we've covered a lot. Historical parallels, the Seventh-day Adventist view of authority, and that kind of surprising call to separate from politics, but still be active in the world.
Phew, lots to think about. And before we move on to part 2, we want to leave you with a question to chew on. If Jesus himself chose not to get involved in the politics of his time, does that mean his followers today should do the same? How do you balance your faith with your responsibility as a citizen?
It's a tough question for sure. No easy answers. But hopefully this deep dive has given you some things to think about, a new perspective maybe, and even a little bit of inspiration. What parts stood out to you? What made you think differently? We'd love to hear from you. Head over to our website or social media, and let's keep this conversation going.
Yeah, come join us. We'll be right back with part 2 after a quick break. Welcome back to our deep dive on religious liberty and politics. We've been talking about how Seventh-day Adventists handle this tricky area, and I think it's time to shift gears a little.
Yeah, good point. We've been focusing on this idea of separation from politics. But how does that actually work in real life? Does it mean completely avoiding any kind of civic engagement?
That's where things get really interesting. You see that article from Adventist.org we mentioned earlier? Well, it explains that even though they believe in staying out of partisan politics, they're super committed to advocating for religious freedom for everybody, not just for themselves.
So it's not about isolating themselves, but more like engaging strategically.
You got it. They've been actively working on religious liberty issues for over a century. They even work with governments and international organizations through their Department of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty, or PARL for short.
PRL, okay, that sounds like some kind of pirate crew fighting for freedom on the high seas.
Haha, well, they are fighting for something precious. But their weapons are legal expertise and diplomacy. Not swords and cannons. They work on all sorts of things, like challenging laws that restrict religious freedom, advocating for the release of prisoners of conscience, supporting people who've been fired because of their beliefs. It's a wide range of issues.
So they're not just talking the talk. They're actually walking the walk when it comes to defending religious freedom.
Absolutely. And what makes it even more interesting is that they're often a religious minority in many parts of the world.
Ah, so they know firsthand what it's like to face discrimination or intolerance.
Exactly. That experience has made them even more committed to fighting for religious freedom for everyone, no matter what they believe.
It's like they're saying, we know what it feels like to be marginalized, so we're going to fight for everyone's right to believe what they want and practice their faith without fear.
That's a powerful message. And they see this whole fight as crucial for creating a society where different viewpoints can coexist peacefully.
Makes you think about that old saying, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. You can't just assume that religious liberty will always be there. You have to constantly defend it, not just for yourself, but for everyone.
And the Seventh-day Adventist Church takes that responsibility seriously. They even went a step further and created the International Religious Liberty Association, or IRLA.
What's that? Is that like PRL, but on a global scale or something?
You could say that. The IRLA is non-sectarian, so it brings together people from all kinds of faiths. Catholics, Baptists, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, you name it.
Wow, so it's like a real interfaith coalition for religious freedom.
Exactly. They work together through conferences, educational programs, and advocacy to promote understanding and respect for religious freedom all over the world.
It's pretty inspiring to see people from different faiths who might disagree on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Coming together to fight for this basic human right.
It really is, and it shows that religious liberty isn't just some abstract idea. It has real-world consequences for people's lives.
You know, as we're talking about this, I keep thinking about that phrase from gospel workers, separate but not reclusive. It seems like that applies not just to individuals, but to the Seventh-day Adventist Church as a whole.
I see what you mean. They're choosing to engage with the world, especially on this issue of religious freedom, but they're doing it in a way that stays true to their principles.
So they're not joining political parties or endorsing candidates, but they're using their voice and influence to advocate for something they deeply care about.
And that's a powerful example of how faith can motivate people to work for a positive change in the world.
It reminds us that there are lots of ways to make a difference. You don't have to be a politician or an activist to stand up for what you believe in.
Exactly. You can make your voice heard through your actions, your choices.
Right.
And by supporting organizations that are fighting for your values.
That brings us back to that question we were talking about earlier. How do you balance your faith with your responsibilities as a citizen? The Seventh-day Adventist approach gives us one interesting answer. Engage strategically, advocate passionately. And always remember that religious freedom is something worth fighting for.
Now in the last part of our deep dive, we're going to look inward and explore what gospel workers has to say about the internal dynamics of the church.
Sounds fascinating. I'm ready to go deeper. All right, so we're back for the last part of our deep dive into religious liberty and politics. We've talked about all the outward stuff, like those historical parallels, the Seventh-day Adventist stance on authority, and how they engage with the rest of the world. Now let's turn inward a bit. What does gospel workers have to say about keeping things unified within the church itself?
This is where it gets really interesting. They're super big on unity, you know, especially when it comes to touchy subjects like politics. They want to keep the focus on spiritual matters, not let disagreements about worldly stuff pull the church apart.
All right, it's like they're saying, hey, we're all on the same team here. Let's not let politics get in the way of the big picture.
Exactly. Remember that warning about teachers or leaders getting too caught up in politics? The book is really firm on that. They should either get back to focusing on spiritual things or step down from their positions.
Yeah, that's pretty intense. But I guess it makes sense. Imagine going to church for spiritual guidance, and all you get is a lecture on political candidates or policies. It's like, wait a minute, isn't this supposed to be about something deeper than that?
Totally. They want to protect the church as a safe space where people can come together no matter their political views and focus on their faith and spiritual growth. It goes back to that separation idea, not just from the political system, but from those heated arguments that politics always seems to bring.
Yeah, like that saying, check your politics at the door. Come together and focus on what unites you, not what divides you.
Exactly. Gospel workers is really concerned about anything that could mess up that harmony and unity, whether it's teachers pushing their political views, ministers turning the pulpit into a political platform, or even just casual conversations that turn into big arguments. All of that can weaken the sense of community and that shared purpose that the church is supposed to have.
It's like trying to build a house while everyone's arguing about what color to paint it. We got to be on the same page if you want to get anything done.
For sure. And they argue that this unity is super important for the church's mission. Like, how can you effectively spread a message of love, hope, and compassion if you're always fighting amongst yourselves?
Good point.
Now, here's the twist. Even though they're all about separating from politics, they're not saying you should be silent or passive when it comes to sharing your faith.
Yeah, it's not about hiding your light under a bushel or anything. It's about finding other ways to let it shine.
Right. Remember that comparison to Martin Luther we were talking about before? His writings came from such a strong place of conviction. They basically started a whole revolution in the church.
And we have so many more ways to spread a message now. Books, articles, websites, social media, the list goes on and on.
It's true. But The book says it's not enough to just heavy the tools, it's about the passion and dedication you bring to using them. That fire in your belly, that commitment to sharing what you truly believe.
Yeah, you can have the most high-tech microphone in the world, but if you're not speaking from the heart, if you don't really believe what you're saying, it's just empty noise.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That authenticity, that genuine passion, that's what really connects with people and makes a difference.
So to sum up our deep dive into the Seventh-day Adventist perspective on religious liberty and politics, it seems like the main message is this: be strong in your beliefs, be respectful of authority, but don't get mixed up in the political system. Focus on building unity within the church, and let your actions, your choices, and your passionate sharing of your faith be the loudest ways you speak to the world.
Beautifully put. It's a really thought-provoking perspective, no matter what your own beliefs or political views might be.
It definitely leaves us with some big questions. Like, in a world where so much is tied to politics, is it even possible to stay separate without compromising your values or ignoring your responsibilities as a citizen?
Now, that's the million-dollar question, and I think it's one we all have to wrestle with in our own ways.
No easy answers for sure. But hopefully this deep dive has given you some things to think about.
Yeah.
Maybe a new way of looking at things, and hopefully even a little bit of inspiration.
Absolutely. We always love to hear from you, so head over to our website or social media and tell us what resonated with you, what challenged you. Let's keep this conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.